Here we are back again. We're getting ready to put this LS motor into this Blazer. No, we're not. So here behind me is project 428, and this thing is pretty much good to go and out the door back to the customer. And I know he's super excited to get it. There's just a few little things which I'll go over with you in this episode. So I'll probably do one more video after this one, and it'll be an overview about doing a 5.0 swap in a Foxbody. So we'll look at things like cost, what parts can you reuse, what parts are a must, what parts are optional, because there is a lot of ways to do this, whether you're doing it on a budget or you're trying to go for an OE type look and feel like this one was, or if you're gonna do a crazy build and potentially go down that road. So I think that'll pretty much summarize and sum up the project 428. But yeah, let's get this car up in the air so we can go over everything that we've done and how we've managed to get this project from that raggedy old looking little 4-cylinder to what we have now, an actual 5.0 notchback. So I've gone ahead and disconnected the brake line block here that goes from the hard line to this flex line. And that actually mounts up to where the other muffler hanger needs to come down on the underside here. So we'll make sure that we get the proper bracket bolted up in there, and we're gonna have to put a joiner in that line to come up over here to get us closer to the 5-liter distribution point for that brake line. So we've gone ahead, disconnected the shocks. We've loosened off the lower control arm bolts, the upper control arm bolts. So make sure that all your bolts spin freely first. These two I had to kind of work with the impact gun back and forth to make sure that they would spin. Sometimes these things are like seized in the bushings and can be a real nightmare. So we got lucky here, disconnected the drive shaft, and it is held up with a bungee cord up there. So other than that, we got the pumpkin also stabilized here, just helping with the shocks. So I'm going to go ahead and let this down. That should put us in a position I can pop the rear springs out, and then we'll put the car closer to the ground so that way when we let the diff out, the diff is lower and not higher, making our lives a little bit easier to work with it and maneuver it out. So anyways, we'll get to it, get this diff dropped out. So here we are, it's the next day, came in on a weekend just because I wanted to wrap up a few critical things. My apologies, I actually dropped my GoPro from the bottom of the car where that light is. It fell, it broke my mount, and the battery died, and it was just kind of, you know, it's Friday, you're hustling, you're wanting to try and wrap everything up, and it just got to that point where I knew it wasn't gonna happen. So we've got the diff in, got our springs in. One main thing is that the shock mount on a 4-cylinder mounts this way with one bolt through where this mount is on the rear end, and these shocks are no good at all, so they actually need to get replaced. You can actually, like, when you can do that with your shock, it means it's not in the best of shape. So other than that, I ended up using the e-brake cables that were already in the car. They were in good shape, so I had to bust off the shoes real quick and get those cables clipped in. Got our drums on, everything is adjusted there, so everything is good. And now I'm just working on the brake line setup. So some of you guys were asking about this flex line and how is it gonna bolt up. Well, I have the 5.0 block bolted up to the floor there. That is pop riveted in by factory, but I opted to bolt it in. Now on our 4-cylinder, the brake line distribution block was about here, and we can still see the line here. So what we have to do today is I'm going to put a coupler in here, and that coupler is going to have a piece of line that goes up over to here. So I actually took that distribution block for the brake line out of lemon dropped. Everything on the bottom side of that car actually needs to come out to make sure that we can sandblast everything on the floor anyways. So I actually took the piece of line out as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get this mocked up, flare the end. All right, so rear diff was pretty straightforward. It's still the 4-cylinder springs in the back. Those have been cut down a little bit just to help out with that stance. We got our 5.0 drive shaft installed in here, which we had to do beforehand anyways. So on the front side as well, got the sway bar bolted in with our end links and everything else. So I managed to do quite a bit of cleanup in here. You know, while I was replacing parts and such, you know, those lower control arms came out pretty good. Springs, well, the springs are out of another car because of a little whoops. But all the spindles have been painted, the calipers have been painted up. So everything on the underside here is looking pretty good. I managed to convince the owner to go ahead and get new struts and shocks. So I'm going to be replacing those. But other than that, the rear end, the 8.8 is in. It's all painted up nice. We have the sway bar in the back installed, so that goes into the lower control arms. Now, one thing that you guys are going to notice, this thing is so caked of dirt and mud and everything else underneath here. So the owner is going to have his work cut out for him to do some serious detailing on the underside here. Waiting on some shocks, and the owner actually opted to go ahead and replace the front struts as well. I told him, you know what? Even though they were okay, by the signs of the rears, maybe they're not going to last that much longer. So good news is you guys got to see what it takes to put a 4-cylinder strut on the 5-liter spindles, a couple shims, honing out the holes a little bit. So it does work, but in this case, got a brand new set of KYB Excel Gs right here. So these should do the trick. When you're doing the struts, we can get away with just doing this main top nut right here, so we won't change any of the suspension geometry. So again, you can see this is still factory. It's still got the factory rivet right there. So these things have never moved. Won't waste any more time here. Go ahead, pop this wheel off, and we'll do the passenger side first, and I'll flip over to the driver's side, get that done. Hopefully, while I'm doing that, the rear shocks will show up. If not, then maybe it's a tomorrow thing. Anyways, let's get this done. All right, so since the car is a little bit lower now, I've actually taken the bump stop and cut it in half, so that way there's still a bump stop, but less likelihood of it bottoming out. So there we are, things look nice and clean in here. You can actually see the fuel lines, put some nice proper clips up in here so everything is tucked up out of the way. Sway bars back installed, so everything suspension and brake wise is all cleaned up, nice and new. Just need to hit the inside of this inner fender with the pressure washer, and that'll get the rest of this all cleaned up. All right guys, so the last thing that we're going to be doing on this car to make it official, 5.0 emblem. So I think with this conversion, the car has earned it. And what I've done here is I've used some tape to mark off the distance of the factory location. And this is another one of my biggest pet peeves, is if you're running your 5.0 emblem and it's off, or you're changing it, or whatever you're doing, you've got your car painted, please put it back where it belongs. The distance is 2 inches from the edge of the fender to the start of the emblem, and that applies to both sides, and 1 3/8 up from this molding. So if this molding's been off, make sure that this is in the right place, and however you need to do this measurement. So just going to use some glass cleaner here, make sure the surface is nice and clean. Now this car is probably going to be going for paint after this summer, so the emblems are going to come off, but for this summer he wanted to make sure that everything is there for the look and feel. So now I'll take a step back, look at it from back there, but this should be exactly where this emblem needs to be. Looks good. I'm going to commit. All right, so now I'll head over to the other side, get that one done, and this car is going to be good for its full feature.